How's it going, guys? My name is Zach with the Movie Castle, and today we're going to be taking a look at Junji Ito Maniac, Episode 4. This is another one that is in two parts. The first part is called 4x4 Walls. Episode 4, 4x4 Walls. That's gotta be intentional, right? The second half is entitled The Sandman's Lair. This is, of course, based on manga by Junji Ito. The first one, 4x4 Walls, is more commonly translated as The Room with Four Walls, and even though we don't have the story officially available in the States right now, it does feature Junji Ito's character Soichi, and Viz does plan to put out a Soichi collection in July of 2023, so hopefully we'll get this coming over pretty soon. This is a pretty fun story. Soichi is a reoccurring Junji Ito character. He's kind of like the problem child of his family, and he's big into magic and the occult, and he constantly gets his family into a bunch of wacky adventures. In this one, the family hires this creepy carpenter to soundproof the older brother's room after Soichi torments him too much. But the carpenter is very strange, and his solution for the soundproofing will lead to a very bizarre and surreal chase sequence toward the end. I really did like that one. The second one, The Sandman's Lair, is collected in Deserter. Deserter is a collection of Junji Ito's earlier stories, as it says on the back there. And yeah, this is an early Junji Ito story. In the book, it's referred to as Where the Sandman Lives. And I do kind of like that idea with translations. These titles were obviously written in Japanese first, but translation is not necessarily one-to-one. So Netflix says The Sandman's Lair, and Viz says Where the Sandman Lives. An interesting discrepancy there. But anyway, in this one, a boyfriend tells his girlfriend, "You need to watch me so I don't fall asleep because my dream self is trying to take over." And it leads to a really creepy Junji Ito visual that's super, super fun. And this was, like I said, an older comic. If you look back at the art, it is a little more rougher than that nice, clean, polished, high-detailed Junji Ito we're used to. But it is really cool to see an early example of his surrealist nightmares and insane imagery. Really, a early classic Junji Ito story. And I guess because this is one of his older stories, they kind of gave this episode a little bit of a retro feel. The colors are a little softer, but what you guys may notice more is the aspect ratio is actually shrunken and more square-like, which I thought was interesting, even though this isn't a complete stylistic overhaul and it's still, you can tell it was made by modern computers. That nice little nod to 90s anime, it definitely appreciated. Overall, I really did like this episode. The first one is comedy, and like I said, not everyone's looking forward to comedy when they want Ito, which it is kind of, people don't know just how much comedy he does do. Even his serious stuff, there's kind of a funny edge to it at times. But the first episode, the Hikizuri siblings, I knew that wasn't for everyone because it was, a sitcom. But Soichi is a much more famous character, and even though this is more comedy, following a likable character into a very, very memorable final scene, a crazy, insane chase, but just this setup and how the soundproofing is done is so bizarre and surreal that, you still have large chunks of Junji Ito's horrific creativity there, but also it doesn't go for the whole episode. This is asymmetric, as with the last one, where it's roughly 2/3 of the episode is the Soichi story, and the last third is the Sandman's Lair story. And the Sandman's Lair, I was surprised that as short as it was, it actually fit as well as it did. Really, looking back at the story, the things that they cut out, like a scene where when she stays over with her boyfriend, she has her best friends say that they're doing a sleepover with her instead. That's not super important. Cut that out. And a lot of it is inner monologue and narration, which is cool in a comic, but doesn't necessarily translate super well, you know? So a lot of scenes where she's talking to herself, yeah, you can cut that. And really, it is about finding the right story for the right length of time that you need. And I did think that, you know, even though when I was reading through it, I didn't think, oh yeah, you can do this thing in a little more than 5 minutes. But seeing their adaptation, I'm like, wow, that was short, but didn't feel rushed. And I have to say props to the team for figuring out that pacing. But anyway, this is a good episode. It's not my absolute favorite, you know, the more comedy version at the first half, not exactly what I'm looking for, but it did lead to a very memorable ending. And then the Sandman is just a classic Junji Ito story with a classic visual. So yeah, not my favorite episode ever. I don't know if it will crack my top of the series or anything, but for a random middle episode of an anthology show, still pretty good and definitely recommend it. If you guys want to see me analyze this episode a little more, I'm going to talk more about each of the stories. I still won't go into heavy spoilers, but I do want to do a little bit deeper of an analysis. So anyway, 4x4 walls. We open up with the brother studying, and as he's studying, Soichi is up in the attic, whispering down to him just really immature taunts. Things like, you will get all the questions wrong on your quiz, the teacher will scold you, you will cry. And there is something about Soichi being mean and immature, it just comes off as so goofy and funny. But he goes down to complain to his father and finds out that the family's been downstairs and watching TV for a while, so it couldn't have been Soichi. Which it is weird that right off the bat he does pull it off good when he doesn't really pull this off too well later on. They show him in the beginning nailing a doll to a tree. Maybe it was part of a magical ritual or something, I don't know. But Soichi says, it's not me. The house is haunted by a poltergeist. You don't want to be the one angering the poltergeist. But of course it's really him in the attic yelling down at his brother, just causing him not to focus. And he'll try like later on to, you know, move stuff around with fishing line, and when the brother catches him, he's like, the strings summon the poltergeist. Yeah, Soichi, I don't think you're gonna get away with that one. But they decide to hire a carpenter to soundproof the walls. And I don't know, Soichi had nothing to do with hiring this guy, yet they still managed to find a really weird looking carpenter. He's got this creepy voice. It almost sounded like Mark Hamill doing the Joker or something. A creepy voice, tattoos around his eyes, and you know that he's up to something. And Soichi is helping him out. He's interested in the process. And I know Soichi is the one causing the problem. You really shouldn't let him be involved in the solution, but the parents are actually kind of happy. The carpenter likes him, and you know, he has this thing where he shoots nails out of his mouth, so he's actually, it's a useful skill if you're a carpenter, and the parents are like, maybe he'll find a real world skill and find an actual place in society, which I do like. You know, there's so many things that, you know, the story is surreal but do have real world equivalents, you know. The whole story is a ridiculous version of my siblings being too loud pushed to a supernatural extreme, but we also get this real world concept of how someone whose life will be off and then there's some little thing they're good at, and you're like, please tell me you're gonna stick with this. You might find a way out of here. And of course, usually you come back in a month and they've totally abandoned it. But I did like that idea that his parents are like, maybe Soichi will get a stable job as a carpenter. I thought that was funny. But anyway, I don't want to go too far, and I want that reveal when you actually see what this crazy carpenter does to his room. I do want that reveal to be fresh for you, but let's just say, right from opening the door, you can tell that this room is very weird and strange and bizarre, and it's such a creative concept. It's one that I get the idea behind, but at the same time, you know, you wonder, man, how did you think of that? And it's a story that takes place in one bedroom, yet what it gets turned into at the end is something that you can have this really strange and memorable chase scene through. This is, yeah, it's a concept that's going to be super memorable, and a scene at the end that is super fun. That being said, after the chase sequence, it does end a little abruptly, a case of do a funny joke and switch to the next story. But that being said, I don't know. I had a good time with this. You know, I'm not as big into the humorous stories, but this one, man, it's sort of like what the room gets turned into isn't necessarily anything that's like horrific and dangerous, but man, it's so strange and bizarre, and I gotta love Junji Ito's creativity. The one after that, The Sandman's Lair. Girlfriend, boyfriend, going out for coffee. He looks tired, and the girlfriend asks why, and he tells her, 3 days ago, my other self in my dreams is trying to take my place, and since he hatched this plot, I have not gone back to sleep because I don't want him to take over. The boyfriend's apparently a writer, and the girlfriend brushes that off as you're letting your stories get the better of you. He says, come to my house and keep me awake. And inside the house, you see he's got like the TV, he's got his music, he's got things to keep him up. But he's been up for 3 days. It's not a good idea. And she gets handed a roll of tape. You know, it slides across the floor. And he says, tape my wrist and feet together so that if I do fall asleep, he doesn't, you know, come out and attack me. And she, of course, complies but doesn't believe him. When he falls asleep, she actually cuts the tape off his wrist and says, this is silly. You don't really need that. And then she starts reading a book until she too falls asleep. And then we get to see the horror behind this story. His arm gets sucked up into his body, and the flip side, the inside of his arm, comes out of his mouth as his inner self. They say in the manga that it's like a reversible hoodie. The inside of himself is trying to turn himself inside out and take over. It's a horrific visual, and when the hand touches the girlfriend's leg, she wakes up screaming, and they have to literally shove him back the right way around. Creepy, creepy visual, but now that they know it's real, now that they know what it is and what they have to do, how do you stop that? How do you prepare for the second attack? But anyway, like I said, this is early Junji Ito, which is why they're going with this kind of, you know, early aesthetic with the, you know, smaller ratio and softer colors. It looks a little 90s. But I do want to say, looking back at early Junji Ito, in addition to the art not being quite as polished, there are a few other strange things. First, they question it a lot more. Like I mentioned in my review for Hanging Blimps, Ito has built up an audience that has accepted his surrealist and bizarre horror, and, you know, not necessarily something American audiences have, but also back then, we get more scenes with his girlfriend going, that's impossible, that's crazy, your dream self taking over, that's just your story. You know, you get much more questioning. She goes, you can't turn yourself inside out, don't you have guts and stuff? And the boyfriend gives this line about, I think I felt empty for a long time. But it is kind of funny looking at this early Junji Ito and then looking at a later story. Like in Uzumaki, people start turning into snails and the other kids in school go, huh, we're gonna have to put him in the snail pen out back. And it is kind of funny just how much more accepting his characters become later on of these strange and bizarre things. So yeah, earlier on they question more. Also, this episode tips its hand a little quicker as to what the horror is. You know, it is kind of hard. I don't like doing spoilers, and talking about Junji Ito stories without spoiling them often means I can't talk about the crazy stuff. Although that being said, freaking people on the internet, you gotta read this Junji Ito story. It's the one where, spoiler, and that can get a little frustrating. But I do like with this one, they actually show really early on, like it's not a spoiler what the Sandman's trying to do. And it is, just something interesting and horrific. A really early, crazy, horrific Junji Ito body horror, literally turning yourself inside out. And yeah, later on, when you get more extreme examples, I mean, it obviously looks cooler in the comic, but that being said, it looks fine here. And, you know, it's a cool extreme example, but towards the end, and I won't spoil it, but when it's revealed why the Sandman wants to come out, it's a pretty interesting reason. And also, what the girlfriend decides to do about it, again, a really interesting concept, like, huh, wouldn't have thought of that. I wonder what will happen. And the end of the story is pretty crazy. But anyway, overall, I really did like both these stories. You know, always cool to see Soichi. He was in Junji Ito collection. Now he's here. I think he has 3 or 4 total stories of his that got adapted. I would be curious, you know, if we get another season of Maniac, or if we get another anthology. What if they, you know, we had collection, then Maniac. What if each time they just change its name, then it'll be like Junji Ito Nightmare or something, you know? But anyway, cool to see this. Again, not my absolute favorite episode. Good to see Soichi. Crazy chase sequence and classic early Ito. But, you know, even though it's not my favorite, I still think it's pretty good. And for a 12-episode anthology, a random one in the middle, being pretty solid, you know, I do think that's fun. I know some people are complaining about certain stuff in the series, and obviously Ito's work is always going to look best in the comic. I mean, his art is just so good, and being able to read, you can go at your own pace and slow down and absorb things better. But that being said, we gotta admit, this series is such a significant step up from Junji Ito collection. And, you know, if the next one gets better, that should be really great. I am really looking forward to the Uzumaki show that's supposed to come out on Adult Swim. But man, that thing, they've been saying it was going to come out for so long. Obviously, we had pandemic delays and everything. It's a show that I really want to see, but at this point, I'm like, will we ever get to see it? But the trailer looks cool, so fingers crossed. Anyway, to everyone who's watched so far, thank you for watching. To everyone who's liked and subscribed, thank you. You really are helping the channel out. I'll leave a relevant playlist on the bottom. This should be my Junji Ito playlist, where you can see me talk about a few of his books, definitely working on reading and reviewing more. I've also talked about the past episodes of this show, so the first 3, and I even did a manga guide if you guys want to see where the official releases are that make up what of the show is released. I also have pocket curse unboxings, like this one over here. Anyway, have a good day. I'll see you guys again very, very soon. Junji Ito playlist should be popping up here on the bottom. Have a good day now.